Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, doggone it, here we are 3 days from the official start of spring, and it's snowing. It's almost too much for a gardener to take. So I asked a lot of you what would be a good indoor topic for today, because that's where I'm going to have to be. And it turns out many of you still have questions about seed starting. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Oh, very funny. Now, some of you asked a question about how we use our greenhouse. First of all, it is 6 feet wide by 8 feet long. It has 2 long planting tables in it. And really, I just use the greenhouse as kind of a staging area for transplants until it's safe for the plants to go right out into the garden. But inside, what I do is I put a capillary mat, and I have some gutters on each table that hold water, and they suck the water up into the capillary mat, and so when I have plants on top of it, they're automatically watered. It works really great. Now, before I start answering some of your questions about seed starting, I wanted to point out 4 things on my website that you should find helpful. First of all, there is a guides menu, and that's where all of my resources are. So if you go down that menu, you'll notice that there is a seed starting scheduler. And when you go to that, what it gives you is a link to a form that you can print out. It's a PDF file, and it gives you something to fill in when you want to start your plants from seed. So that is a help. Now, back under the guides menu, if you go a little farther down, the very next link is seed starting, when to plant vegetables, and it's for all zones. What I did is I listed the most commonly grown vegetable crops, and then I list when you would typically plant them. For example, broccoli, 6 weeks before last spring frost. So if you know what the typical last frost date in the spring is for your area, then you can get your calendar out and go, okay, 6 weeks before that is such and such date, and that's the date I need to start my broccoli seeds indoors. Now, I'm going to go back again to the guides menu. Right below this all zones seed starting list is one specifically for zones 5 and 6, because that's what I am the very most familiar with, because I'm in zone 5. Anyway, this one gives you specific dates of when to start a crop indoors. If there isn't a date listed for starting them indoors, that means you really should just sow them directly outdoors in the garden, and I give you a tentative date for starting them. The other thing I wanted to show you, because someone was asking, well, I want to know exactly what you're growing. Again, back into the guides menu, if you scroll down a little bit farther, here is Susan's Garden 2019. Here is everything I'm growing, the name of the crop, the variety or varieties, and seed sources for them, because I know you always want to know. Now, I always recommend that you check with your local garden center first, because then you save on shipping. But if you can't find them locally, here are some suggested sources for the things I'm growing. Now, one of your fellow gardeners was remembering that I use kind of an unconventional method to start some of my seeds. I use this system from Gardens Alive that's called the All Roots Seed Starting System. And I know I'm always harping about not letting plants sit in water because it can make the roots rot. However, for seed starting, this method works amazingly well. And what each of these contains is a styrofoam grid with holes in it. This is a water reservoir, and of course a lid. And into these holes goes these little soil plugs that you can buy at Gardens Alive. Now, I have the 55 cell system, the 10 cell system, and the 25 cell system. And they do not carry the 25 cell system anymore. So if that's a size that you really like, let them know, because maybe they'll start carrying them again. But anyway, the way it works, and I'm just going to use this small one as a demonstration, is you take the soil plugs and you put them in the sink in some water, let them soak a little bit, just for a few minutes to hydrate. And then you pop them into these openings. And each of these plugs has a little hole in the top that you put your seeds in. Now, one thing I learned early on is that you really can't use these to start something that has a really large seed. But it works really well for tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, artichokes, celery, things that have kind of a smallish seed. And I also start a lot of my annual flowers in it. But anyway, you keep filling in all of your little soil plugs. You place the seed right inside this little opening. You don't have to cover it or anything. And then you fill up the reservoir, you place that in there, and there's a little clear plastic lid that goes on the top, and you put it under a grow light, and that's it. And within a few days, the seeds will germinate, and they grow amazingly well. So the plants always have access to water, which is nice, and they will end up with really great root systems. Another thing that I like to do when I'm starting seeds in these little pony packs is for watering them once they have sprouted, I like to put them on top of a capillary mat. Now, I mentioned capillary mats with regards to my greenhouse, and it's an absorbent type of a material, and I set them on top of a support in a water reservoir. And what happens is the water wicks up through the bottom of the pony pack and keeps the seedlings watered. That works really well. I don't have to worry about them drying out without my noticing it. So you might consider that. You can find capillary mats at greenhouse supply stores. A few people have been asking me which plants are okay to start now. And generally what you're looking at are cool season crops. And typically what you see on the seed packet is plant in the garden as soon as the soil can be worked. Now, there are also some types of cool season crops that you would start indoors ahead of time to give them a little bit of a head start. But the other thing you might be starting soon would be warm season crops such as tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers, because they need a bit of time before they can safely go out into the garden. Examples of crops that you could start outdoors once your soil is dry enough to be worked with would be things like carrots, arugula, parsnips, spinach, lettuce, Swiss chard, and beets. Examples of crops that you might start indoors ahead of time include things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, onions, and leeks. Now, leeks take quite a long time to get started, so you typically would get them started indoors in about February. A lot of you have been asking what I'm growing in my garden this year, and I showed you how to find a list of every single thing I'm growing. But I also wanted to highlight some of the crops I'm growing this year because I'm very excited about them, and they might be something you want to try too. Now remember that on that list of what I'm growing that's on my website, there's also a list of sources. So if you can't find some of the seeds at your local garden center, you can find them online. We grew early dividend broccoli last year, and I am totally sold on it. It's very flavorful, incredibly productive, and it freezes really well. Musica pole beans are a favorite of ours, also very flavorful. They produce a ton of beans, and of course they freeze really well too. I'm also trying Gita yard-long beans for the very first time. I'm excited about growing them because I've heard they're very tasty. We're a big fan of Sweetness Bicolor sweet corn. It is super tasty. It produces really nice size ears that are really sweet. Now, I've been growing Cylindra which is also known as cylindrical beets, for quite a few years now, and I'm planning to grow some of them this year, but I'm also trying Chioggia, and that has been around for quite a few years now, but I'm trying them for the first time, and I really like how they have a striped root. I grow celery every year, and Tango is the cultivar that I like, but the other one that's really good is Utah Improved, and those both do really well in northern climates. Now, a lot of people think, why in the world would I start celery from seed and grow it myself when you can just go to the grocery store and buy some? Well, usually what happened in the old days is I would go buy a whole bunch of celery. I'd use some of it for making tuna sandwiches or something, and then I'd forget about it, and it would turn to mush in the vegetable drawer. So I have been growing celery for years now, and I discovered that you just pick a stalk when you need it, you don't waste anything, and you can also freeze it later, especially at the end of the season. I also grew cucamelons last year for the first time, and if you've never tried them, I think you really must. They are very small. They look like a tiny watermelon. They are crunchy, and they have a citrusy flavor. They grow as a vine, and I'm excited to try them again this year. Something new we're growing this year is purple of Sicily cauliflower, and I completely admit I'm growing it because it's purple. Now, lettuce is always important to me because I love making salads, and so two new cultivars that I'm growing this year are Little Gem and Bronze Beauty. They should look gorgeous in salads. We're also growing green arrow shell peas again this year, and we grow them in rain gutters, so you gotta stay tuned for that. As far as squash goes, I really love Clarimore zucchini squash. It is very flavorful, very tender, and quite productive. And then the other thing that I've been growing for a few years, and I've been trying to spread the word about, is Trombetta di Albenga climbing summer squash. You can find it at Renee's Garden, and they are delicious. They taste like artichoke hearts, and they climb, which is so unusual. But they are really a great addition to the garden, and I think that vertical gardening saves a lot of space. Let's talk about melons for a moment. Because I live in a short growing season, I'm always on the lookout for melons that will mature early, because you cannot beat the taste of a homegrown melon. It's so worth adding to your garden. On the left is Ha Ogan honeydew melon. I've grown that for a couple of years now, and it is absolutely to die for. On the right is a watermelon. Now, I don't typically grow them, but there's a new variety called Golden Gold. It matures in 70 days, and it's an All-America Selections winner. I'm very excited about trying it. It has a yellow flesh and should be really sweet. We like to grow winter squash because they're very flavorful and they keep a really long time in storage over the fall and winter months. So they're an important component of our diet. This year I'm going to add in vegetable spaghetti or spaghetti squash. I've grown it before, but they really are very tasty, and so I thought it'd be fun to add it to the garden this year. On the right is Cushaw winter squash, and that was something that was recommended to me by someone who grew up in the South. And she told me that they make fabulous pies. So I decided to try them last year, and boy, was she right. And they grow in our short season, which is awesome. I also enjoy growing pumpkins, partly for eating purposes and partly for decorations. So on the left, I'm going to grow some Jack B. Little pumpkins. Those are just the small ones for decorating the house. And on the right is New England pie. And that is a very reliable pumpkin for using for pies. Everyone loves growing tomatoes, right? Well, I'm no exception, so there are 3 new cultivars that I wanted to try. The first one is a paste tomato, so one that is good for making salsa, ketchup, and sauce, and it's called Gilberti. It also has good resistance to blossom end rot, which I thought would be a real plus. The second one is an adorable little cherry tomato called Sunrise Bumblebee, and the flesh is kind of a mixture of orange, yellow, pink, and red, so I thought that would look pretty cool. And then a nice slicer that I'm trying this year is Skyway. You'll also notice there's tomatillo there, which is Toma Verde. That's the name of the variety. And Bill and I love to make salsa, so we thought it would be nice to grow them in the garden this year. Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Oh, for Pete's sake, enough is enough. Ugh. Stupid snow.